Arizona Cardinals linebacker Dennis Gardeck had a breakout season in 2020. But what can we expect from him moving forward? After losing all-world pass rusher Chandler Jones to injury last season, the Cardinals had to turn to a group of less heralded players to fill the void left by Jones. And while Haason Reddick was a great story leading the team in 12.5 sacks, Dennis Gardeck's 7 sacks in just 79 pass rush attempts, coupled with his entertaining sack dances, made him arguably one of the best stories in 2020 for the Arizona Cardinals. And when you add to that the fact that he was an unheralded rookie free agent who's managed to make the roster by being a contributor on special teams with a high motor, Dennis Gardeck has quickly emerged as a fan favorite. And though he went down with an injury late in the season, and he's currently recovering in hopes of being ready for the start of the 2021 season, many Cardinals fans have high hopes for his future as a pass rusher on this team. With that in mind, I decided to look back at Dennis Gardeck's 2020 season both in terms of stats and the film to see what went into those 7 sacks and to try to determine if that kind of performance is sustainable moving forward. The first thing we're going to do is look at Dennis Gardeck's stats from 2020 and put them in context compared to other pass rushers in the league. As I previously mentioned, Gardeck had 7 sacks on 79 pass rush snaps. Altogether, he had 18 total pressures. This includes sacks, hurries, and quarterback hits. Overall, those 7 sacks equated to 8.9% of his pass rush snaps. That means on 8.9% of the times he tried to rush the passer, he ended up with a sack. And those sacks were 38.9% of his total pressures. Now, as a point of comparison, let's look at the 5 leading sack producers in 2020. TJ Watt, Aaron Donald, Trey Hendrickson, Haason Reddick, and Zadarius Smith. Now, when you look at these numbers, some things jump out to us immediately. All of these players had far more pass rushing snaps, they had far more pressures, and they had obviously more sacks. But when you look at the sack percent of snaps and the sack percent of total pressures, you see that Dennis Gardeck's production was much more efficient. Now, this doesn't mean Gardeck's a better pass rusher than these players. Really, this is the result of a smaller sample size and being a situational pass rusher. Gardeck's 79 pass rushing snaps happened almost exclusively in clear passing situations. And in general, he just played really well. But he wasn't the only player who had this kind of efficiency over a small sample size. 2 other noteworthy players, Jamal Adams and Devin White, showed comparable efficiency over a small sample size of pass rushing snaps. Jamal Adams had 104 pass rushing snaps and 9.5 sacks for a snap percent of 9.1%, though his sack percent of pressures was a good bit lower than that of Gardeck. And Devin White had 109 snaps, 31 total pressures, 9 sacks, with 8.3% of his pass rush snaps resulting in sacks, and 29% of his pressures being sacks. Now, one key difference between Adams and White as compared to Gardeck is that both of these players are full-time players who also played on running downs, where Gardeck, aside from special teams, was almost exclusively a situational pass rusher. But what this does show us is if teams pick and choose where a player rushes the passer, that pass rusher can have really good efficiency in a small sample size. But before we look at the film, let's do one more point of comparison. Let's take Dennis Gardeck's efficiency, extrapolate it over a larger number of snaps to see just how ridiculous this efficiency is. Here we have the same top 5 sack producers from 2020, showing their pass rush snaps and their sacks, and their sack percent. Now, if we were to adjust that sack percent for all these players, to have them being as efficient as Gardeck was over his 79 snaps, we see that that efficiency translates to absolutely ridiculous numbers of sacks over full-time pass rusher snaps. Clearly, this kind of efficiency is not sustainable over a larger sample size. And if any player managed to maintain this kind of efficiency over full-time pass rusher snaps, it would be the biggest story in the NFL that we've seen for decades. Now, overall, Dennis Gardeck had a remarkable 2020 season in terms of efficiency and productivity. And certainly that efficiency is not sustainable over a larger number of snaps. That doesn't mean he can't continue to be an effective pass rusher for the Cardinals. The best way to project whether Dennis Gardeck can be an effective pass rusher moving forward is to look at the film of his plays last season and see what kind of skill set he actually demonstrated in those pass rushing snaps. So to prepare for this video, I went back and I watched all of his defensive snaps in 2020, and I paid particular attention to those snaps in which he generated pressure. I looked to see what kinds of patterns emerged across those snaps, what kinds of skill sets he demonstrated, and tried to determine to what degree those sacks were the results of things like scheme, mistakes by the offensive line, or Gardeck performing well as a pass rusher. For the purposes of this video, we're going to hone in on those 7 sacks and look and see exactly what happened. Gardeck's first sack came in Week 5 against the New York Jets. Here we see him lined up as an outside linebacker. Gardeck comes off the line quickly and initially gives left tackle George Fant the impression that he's going to try to go to his outside shoulder with a speed move. But instead, Gardeck plants his foot, takes a quick step inside, makes good use of his hands, and closes in on quarterback Joe Flacco. And when we watch that all the way through one more time, you see how this all adds up to a really nice pass rush move. Gardeck's second sack was also in Week 5 against the New York Jets. This time he lines up on the other side, going up against the right tackle. But instead of using a speed move, Gardeck goes right after right tackle Chuma Edoga. Edoga seems caught off guard by Gardeck's strength, and he bull rushes him right back into the quarterback. From there, Gardeck reaches around, grabs hold of Joe Flacco, and brings him down for a sack. And when you watch it all the way through again, you see how the right tackle doesn't seem prepared for the power and leverage that Gardeck generates on this bull rush. Gardeck's third sack came in Week 13 against the Los Angeles Rams. Gardeck lines up in a way that gives the impression he's going to attack the gap between the right tackle and the right guard. But instead, he runs a stunt and takes on left guard David Edwards. Similar to the previous sack, Edwards seems caught off guard by Gardeck's strength and leverage. Once again, Gardeck pushes his man right back into the quarterback, reaches out, and gets the sack. And when you watch it again, you see Gardeck execute the stunt, catch the offensive lineman off guard, and overpower him to make the sack. Gardeck's fourth sack came in Week 14 against the Giants. Initially, he lined up across from the right guard, but ran another stunt to engage left guard Will Hernandez. Gardeck does manage to push Hernandez back a few steps, but Hernandez is a really strong guard and he eventually finds his footing and holds his ground. But then Gardeck manages to use his hands to slip the block, get around Hernandez's left side, and get Daniel Jones for the sack. And when you watch it all the way through, you see how Gardeck appears stuck, but through effort manages to break loose of the block and get the sack. Gardeck's fifth sack also came in Week 14 against the Giants. Now initially he lined up across from left tackle Andrew Thomas, and initially he does engage with Thomas, while defensive tackle Rashard Lawrence engages with left guard Shane Lemieux. But then Gardeck and Lawrence run a stunt and switch their assignments. Gardeck loops around, catches Lemieux off guard, and powers past him to get to quarterback Daniel Jones yet again. And watching at full speed, you see the crispness with which he runs this stunt, leading to the sack. Sack number 6 came in Week 15 against Philadelphia. Gardeck lined up on the outside of right tackle Matt Pryor and used his speed to try to get around Pryor. When Gardeck got past him, Pryor gave Gardeck a push in the hopes that Gardeck would go too deep into the backfield to recover and catch quarterback Jalen Hurts. But Gardeck managed to turn the corner, accelerate quickly, and run down Jalen Hurts to get the sack. And when you watch this play in its entirety, you see how Gardeck's speed and acceleration make the play. Gardeck's seventh and final sack of the season also came in Week 15 against Philadelphia. Gardeck lined up across from left tackle Jordan Mailata, and when the ball was snapped, he attacked Mailata's inside shoulder and forced his way through the gap between Mailata and left guard Isaac Seumalo to sack Jalen Hurts yet one more time. And as you watch this at full speed, you can see how the sack is made by power, tenacity, and pure force of will. As I watched Gardeck's film, the one thing that stood out over and over again was the way that his motor never stops. I could show you a number of plays that illustrate this, but I'm just going to show one more play that I think captures exactly why the Cardinals love having Dennis Gardeck on the team. In this play, you see Gardeck gets tripped up as part of a screen pass by Philadelphia. And while he doesn't make a play on the screen, what's really impressive is that he doesn't give up. He gets up and chases down the ball carrier yards down the field. But now we come back to the original question. Is Dennis Gardeck going to continue to be an effective pass rusher for the Arizona Cardinals? When I look at all the plays from last season, there's some things I noticed. The first thing is that the Cardinals did use him almost exclusively in passing downs, and odds are he's probably going to continue to be a situational pass rusher in that vein. Now the positive side of that is that does put him in advantageous situations where he can pin his ears back and go after the quarterback. Another thing I noticed, and you may have noticed this too if you were looking at the PFF pass blocking grades I was showing for the offensive linemen he was going up against, most of his sacks came against offensive linemen who weren't particularly good pass blockers. There were a few who were decent, but he didn't get any sacks against any really outstanding offensive linemen. But the same thing could probably be said for a lot of full-time pass rushers. But this is something worth noting. Another thing that stood out to me is that he was really good in running stunts. He seemed to run them very precisely and with really good acceleration and burst. Now, Vance Joseph does scheme up a lot of these kinds of things, and certainly that's something that contributed to Gardeck's success. But again, there's something to be said for being able to play within a system and to be able to do so effectively. Another thing I noticed is that Gardeck didn't demonstrate a very wide repertoire of sophisticated pass rush moves. There were a couple good moves, like his first sack of the season against the Jets, but most were a matter of sheer power, speed, acceleration, determination, and not necessarily based on highly developed pass rush moves. But the good news with that is he can continue to develop those, and certainly he'll have the opportunity to learn from some great players like Chandler Jones and J.J. Watt. Another thing that stood out is that offensive linemen really seem to be caught off guard by just how strong he is and just how much leverage he was able to create. And his speed and acceleration contribute to that as well. When you can generate momentum with strength behind it, you can catch offensive linemen off guard. To be completely transparent, I went in this anticipating to see that a lot of his sacks would be based on scheme, that he would have a lot of clear paths to the quarterback based on well-schemed pass rushes. And while the stunts did help Gardeck to be successful, I was really impressed by what I saw in terms of speed, determination, and strength. And while I don't think Gardeck is going to maintain the same level of efficiency he did in 2020, I do think he's going to continue to be an effective situational pass rusher for the Cardinals. And if I had to guess, I think a typical season for him, if he's getting 200 to 300 snaps as a pass rusher, is probably going to be somewhere between 7 and 9 sacks. What do you think the future holds for Dennis Gardeck? Let me know in the comments below. Whatever happens, hopefully we're going to see a lot more of this dance for years to come.